And by the way, it becomes your own destruction. And what's interesting even about that, he says right there, if you go into chapter 2, look at what he says in verse 5. Because of your stubbornness and unrepentant heart, you are storing up wrath for yourself in the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of God. You're storing this up. It's like a divine layaway plan. Sin now, pay later. But that's what it is. R.C. Sproul says, we hear all the time about God's infinite grace and mercy. I cringe when I hear that, he says. God's mercy is infinite insofar as it's mercy bestowed upon us by a being who is infinite. But when the term infinite is used to describe His mercy rather than His person, I have problems with it. Because the Bible makes very clear that there is a limit to God's mercy. There's a limit to His grace. And He is determined not to pour out His mercy on impenitent people forever. There's a time, as the Old Testament repeatedly reports, particularly in the book of the prophet Jeremiah, that God stops being gracious with people and He gives them over to their sin. You know, God's not going to be merciful forever. One day, time's up. You know, people live on borrowed time every day. They always say, tomorrow, I'll do this. Tomorrow, I'll commit my life to Christ. First of all, you don't have a guarantee of tomorrow, right? You might not make it through today, so you're really, really trusting that there'll be a tomorrow. Secondly, can you come to God that way anyway? Can you just wake up one day and say, oh, yeah, I just think I'll give my life to God? Well, only if God has been enacting on your heart. Only if God has been pulling you to Himself. You know, there's some pretty confined issues here. There are some conditions there in salvation. Yes, it's a free gift, but the condition is, number one, you got to receive it. You have to take that free gift. And in taking that free gift, it costs you. You say, well, wait a minute, you just said it was a free gift. Well, it is a free gift. God did everything possible to secure for you redemption, salvation. He stepped in your place. It cost Him everything, right? But you know what? It's going to cost you your life. Jesus said in Luke 9:23 and 24, that if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. That's a cost, isn't it? Death of self. That's a huge cost. That's a giving up of your life to follow Him. And of course, Jesus says, if you're not willing to hate father, mother, brother, sister, and even your own life, you're not worthy of me. You can't be my disciple. So it is a giving up of your own life, your own self. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? So we see what the issues are there. But when you think about this passage right here and you look at this whole idea of abandonment seen here in the wrath of God, where God just pulls back the restraints, the worst thing that can happen for a sinner is to be allowed to go on sinning without any divine restraints. That's the worst thing that can happen. You can go to the end of the New Testament, the book of Revelation, and you can find there in Revelation 22:11 this phrase. It says, he who is unjust, let him be unjust still. He who is filthy, let him be filthy still. And here, basically what it's saying, God gives people over to what they want. He abandons them to their sinful impulses. He removes His restraints. Basically saying, in essence, if you want to sin, go ahead and sin. This is called judicial abandonment. And here, God is dispensing His just judgment. He abandons the impenitent sinner forever. Now, go back to verse 24, and I want you to see the results. What's the results of God giving them over to their sin? Look at verse 24. He says there, therefore God gave them over in the lust of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator who is blessed forever. Amen. So they dishonored their bodies. They worship the creation rather than the Creator. Look at verse 26. For this reason God gave them over to degrading passions. For their women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. And in the same way also men abandoned the natural function of the woman and burned in their desire toward one another, men with men committing indecent acts and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error. So here this is speaking of sexual sin. This is the sexual revolution. Do you think God has given up on America today? Well, just ask yourself, what seems to dominate everything today? Sexual revolution. Everything is about it. Everything. It doesn't matter what you're trying to buy. The commercial to it uses sex to sell it. You're going, I just want to buy some toothpaste. Yes, but if you use this brand, it'll give you sex appeal, right? Wasn't that Ultra Bright, I think, that used that commercial? That's a pretty old one. But I mean, that's what happens. You can't sit down and watch the television for 5 minutes without being inundated with some kind of sexual ad. And of course, you see here, when society accepts lesbianism and homosexuality, that's an indicator that God has abandoned a nation. This is not the first time that God's abandoned a nation. He's done this over and over again. But this is the indicator. Very clear right here in verses 26 and 27. Notice also built into this indecent, sinful behavior is also the penalty of it. And of course that brings up AIDS and all the different sexual diseases that are associated with homosexuality. All of this is part of the wrath of God. This is God giving them over to this. And the sad thing about this, the church, instead of being a light, instead of pointing people to the truth, they just embrace it. And now you have homosexual churches, you have homosexual pastors, lesbian pastors. You have that whole thing right there. And don't judge a church on its size. Just because a church is full doesn't mean it's truly blessed of God. Because you can have, and you do have, many churches that are filled teaching heresy, and that's not the blessing of God. That's a lot of people being deceived. Think about the cults. They fill up their buildings week to week, right? Well, look at the third area that he gives here. The result. Verse 28. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper. This is a reprobate mind. Notice this. Being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful. And although they know the ordinance of God, and how would they know that? Go back to verse 19. Because that which is known about God is evident within them. He says here, although they know the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but also give hearty approval to those who practice them. You know, it's amazing, even in our time in which we live, going back to this whole idea of the sexual revolution. It used to be a day where that was a private matter. You didn't reveal your quote-unquote sexual orientation. You didn't reveal anything about the bedroom publicly. But you have, like in the military, don't ask, don't tell. You don't ask me, I won't tell you. I'm sure that that's working. Especially when you have gay pride parades. But that is just part, like I said, of the abandonment. Now, I want you to understand at this point, God, in His word right here through the Apostle Paul, doesn't stop right here. He has been dealing with unrighteous Gentiles, right? Now in chapter 2, all the way to chapter 3 and verse 8, he deals with the unrighteous Jew. And so when he gets into chapter 2, all the way to chapter 3 and verse 8, he doesn't leave the Jew without excuse. What has he done here in chapter 1? He hasn't left the Gentile without any excuse. He's basically said that they are all in sin, right? Well, he does this in chapter 2 as well. And now we look at the unrighteous Jew. Look at verse 1.